I grew up in Mainz, Germany. I was born in 22, and I lived in Mainz until 1935. And I went to grade school and gymnasium, and when I could no longer go to gymnasium as a Jew, my parents sent me to England to go to school. I spent 5 years in England. And I graduated from high school in 1939. My parents had moved in the meantime to France in order to run a French wine company the family owned. So I was in Bordeaux the day the war was declared. The Brits renewed my visa. The French interned me as an enemy alien. Then they let us run when the Germans came close to the camp. We went into the Pyrenees. The mayor of the little village we ended up in gave us phony papers, gave us employment with the farmers so we wouldn't starve. And we stayed there for about 6 months. And then I got a visa to go to the United States in April of 1941. Arrived in New York, where we had lots of relatives and a business, and worked there for a year, volunteered for the Army the day after Pearl Harbor. It took 6 months for the FBI to clear me. I was put into the medical corps because I was not a citizen. Trained in Little Rock, Arkansas, which was not a great experience. Ended up in a general hospital in Brigham City, Utah, and ended up running the admissions office. I then passed an exam which was called Army Specialized Training Program, which sent people like me to university. After 2 months, I was asked to the commandant's office. There were 3 civilians who talked to me about my experience in France, my knowledge of French, my knowledge of the Pyrenees, proposed that I volunteer for dangerous duty, and I was recruited for OSS. And I ended up in Washington, and I ended up being a confidential messenger between different buildings of the OSS. I protested because I said I joined the army in order to fight the Germans, not to run from one building to the other in Washington. And I said either send me overseas with OSS or send me back to university. So they sent me to Algiers as a finance clerk. Now, finance clerks in OSS were not finance clerks. They were confidential fund people who procured foreign currency to be used in missions in Europe and supplied these monies to the missions we had, either espionage or action mission. And I did this for about 9 months a year. We're now in 1943, 44. And I then was ordered to be in the invasion of southern France with the OSS detachment, still as a finance, by that time, officer. The Germans did not expect the invasion. The invasion had very few casualties. We controlled the air. The German 77th Panzer Division was decimated going up the Rhone Valley, and we moved as the army moved, as everything else moved. And it soon became evident that we had lots of French speakers, but no German speakers. And then, as the war went on and as it became tougher to advance, I was given the responsibility of recruiting German PWs and sending them back behind the German lines on intelligence missions. We had a system in PW camps that the interrogators would identify what they considered anti-Nazis with motivation to do something for their country. And they were sent on different missions. I mean, some of them were parachuted in and made their way back to the lines with papers pointing out that they were on leave. Others were parachuted in order to establish themselves, given safe houses of people we thought or were told were reliable, former socialists, former communists and what have you. And they established themselves with the radio and what have you. And we also had some French civilians we used from Alsace. It was a very worthwhile and very successful operation. When the war ended, I ended up as head of the unit in OSS. I was sent up to Berlin in order to head a clandestine detachment of about 10 intelligence officers and the support mechanism who had been too much involved in black market. And I was then sent up there to clean up and to get them to produce intelligence. And from there I ended up ultimately as head of the Berlin base of OSS and of CIA eventually, producing intelligence on Eastern Germany and on Soviet dispositions to find out if they were or were not prepared to go to war. And we, throughout, brought the evidence that they were not willing to go to war. And from there I ended up as head of operations Eastern Europe in Washington, and ultimately was sent to Hong Kong to get intelligence on China largely, which was not easy. And it depended very much on liaison with the Brits, with other countries, Germans, etc. Liaison with countries that had diplomatic relations with China, which we did not have. When I was in Berlin, CIA mounted and financed Ukrainian so-called resistance fighters in order to create a resistance movement, or in order to supply a so-called resistance movement in the Ukraine. They sent lots of material, lots of money, lots of people. And I, at the time, said, A, there aren't any resistance groups. B, this is mounted by the Soviet intelligence in order to find out who's against them. And all these people who are coming in there are going to get killed. Well, Peter, you know nothing. So, fine. Then we did the same thing in Albania. And when I came to Hong Kong, I found out we were doing the same thing in China. So I said, a agency that does not learn from experience, that deals so irresponsible with human life, is not an agency I like to work for. I resigned in late '59. You got to sleep at night, you know. I went back to the family wine business. We had a company in Mainz, Germany, which we got back after the war from the Germans. And we had a company in Bordeaux, which we got back after the war. When we left Germany, we never got permission to leave. So my father and mother and all the other partners in the company left without permission. They moved a certain amount of assets from Germany to England, and when they left, the German government accused them of Devisenschiebung, of taking money out without permission, sentenced my father and his partners to 5 years of hard labor in absentia. This was at a time when they were more interested in political people than common criminals like my father. So basically, they never caught him. In any case, we had a very easy process of getting our property back. We had never sold it. It was taken away from us. And my cousin in England had rebuilt the company to some extent. He badly needed another partner. When my father died, I left the shares in the company, became ultimately the chairman of the board of the German company, and created Blue Nun as the world brand. And I enjoyed 50 years of being a wine guru and helping the French, the Germans, and everybody else to make wine more popular.
From the White House in the office of the President of the United States, we present an address by Dwight D. Eisenhower.
I think America is paranoid. And I think what Eisenhower said about the military-industrial complex is perfectly true, because the philosophy is that if diplomacy fails, the military may be the only solution, but we don't give diplomacy a chance. We have a country where, unfortunately, the presidential power is so overweening that there are no discussions, there are no limitations, there are no controls. And a population that has never realized who they are, what they are, and what terrible things they've committed in the past. If you control the writing of history, you control the country. So it's an enormous problem, which can be solved, A, by more people participating in the process, B, by sharing the wealth. And you only have to read the Communist Manifesto to see that this is not a new thing, that this has happened before. It is the most unbelievable analysis of what we are going through today.